Some stories don't begin with happiness. They begin with waiting. I've spent many years collecting tales from the American frontier, not the gunfights and gold rushes you see in picture shows, but the quieter stories, the ones about ordinary folks finding their way to each other across impossible distances, stories about second chances, about hands that knew hard work, about hearts that learned to open again after grief had shut them tight. This is one of those stories. It happened in a small town called Clearwater, somewhere in the territories, back when trains still carried hope westward along with cargo and cattle. A woman named Evelyn stood on a platform one afternoon, waiting to be chosen, and a man named Samuel arrived late, covered in dust, looking for something he couldn't name. What happened next changed both their lives forever, but we'll let the story tell itself. The 4 o'clock sun pressed down on Clearwater Station like a hot iron on linen. The wooden platform smelled of creosote and dried tobacco spit, baked into the boards by 100 summer days. Evelyn watched the last wagon pull away. The blonde woman, the youngest of them. Barely 20, sat beside a rancher with clean boots and a new hat. She didn't look back. None of them had looked back. 5 women had stepped off that train 3 hours ago. 5 mail-order brides, each carrying a carpet bag and a letter of introduction. Now 4 wagons rolled down the dusty main street, carrying 4 of those women toward 4 different futures. Evelyn remained. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Her shoes pinched black leather, sensible heels, the kind a respectable woman wore. She'd bought them in St. Louis with the last of her savings. They'd looked fine in the shop window. Now they felt like punishment, the leather stiff and hot against her swollen feet. The station master emerged from his office, green eyeshade pushed back on his forehead. He smelled of ink and old sweat. He glanced at Evelyn, then at the empty platform, then back at Evelyn. "Train to St. Louis comes through tomorrow afternoon," he said. 2:15. "I'm waiting. Ma'am, the men who placed orders, they've all come and gone." "I'm waiting." He shrugged and retreated inside. The telegraph machine clicked and chattered through the open window. Dit-dit-da. Dit-da-dit, someone else's message flying across the wires to someone else's life. Somewhere down the street. A dog barked twice and fell silent. Evelyn did not sit down on the bench. She did not cry. She stood exactly where she'd been standing since the other women left, her carpet bag at her feet, her shadow stretching longer across the wooden boards as the sun moved west. She was 34 years old. She knew what men saw when they looked at her, the gray threading through her brown hair, the lines at the corners of her eyes, the jaw set a little too firm for beauty. She'd watched their gazes slide past her this afternoon, like water around a stone. The young widow from Pennsylvania, loss of husband. Seeking fresh start. She'd been chosen first. Then the school teacher from Ohio, then the 2 sisters from Kentucky, taken together by a pair of brothers who ran a feed store. Evelyn's letter had said, experienced in domestic work, good health, willing to relocate. It had not said 34, plain. Hands like a farm woman's. Maybe it should have. The water tower at the end of the platform dripped steadily into a puddle of mud. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop caught the light for a moment before it fell. A fly buzzed past her ear, circled twice, moved on. She counted the drips. 47, 48, 49. A sound reached her ears, faint at first, then growing. Wheels on hard, packed dirt, the creak of an axle that needed greasing. the snort of tired horses. Evelyn turned her head. A buckboard wagon came around the corner of the freight depot, pulled by two sorrel horses dark with sweat. Dust coated the wagon's sides, the seat, the man who drove it. He looked like he'd ridden through a flour mill and come out the other side. He pulled the horses to a stop, sat there for a moment, looking at the empty platform. Then his eyes found Evelyn. She did not move. He climbed down from the wagon seat, slow and deliberate, the way a man moves when his bones ache from a long ride. Tall, broad through the shoulders, sun-weathered face, beard trimmed short, eyes the color of creek water in shadow. He wore a work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, trousers tucked into boots that had seen 10 years of hard use. He walked toward her across the platform. His boots made solid sounds on the wood. He smelled of horse and dust and something else, hay, maybe, or dried grass. He stopped 6 feet away. Evelyn waited. His eyes moved to her hands first, not her face. Not her figure, her hands. She'd clasped them in front of her. But there was no hiding them, the calluses, the short nails, the roughness that no amount of cream would ever smooth away. "You know how to work," he said. It was not a question. 30 years now. He nodded once, looked at her face then, and she met his gaze without flinching. "I have 2 children," he said. "Their mother passed 2 springs ago. Fever took her in the night." He paused. "The children are not easy. Children never are." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise. Maybe. Or recognition, like he'd expected her to flinch, and she hadn't. "Name's Samuel Mercer. I have a ranch 12 miles north. Cattle mostly, some horses." He paused again, working his jaw like the next words cost him something. "The house needs work. I need help." Evelyn looked at this man covered in dust, who had arrived 3 hours late, and found only her. She looked at his hands, working hands, scarred and strong, nails rimmed with dirt, and at the weariness that sat heavy on his shoulders like a yoke he couldn't set down. "Why were you late?" she asked. "Fence broke at dawn. Lost half my morning rounding up strays that got through." He said it plainly, without excuse or apology. "I figured whoever was left would be the patient kind." She almost smiled. "Almost. Or the desperate kind," she said. "Are you—" Evelyn picked up her carpet bag. The leather handle was warm from the sun, worn smooth where other hands had gripped it before hers, her mother's hands. Her aunt's hands. Now her own. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I've been standing on this platform for 3 hours watching every man in this town look right through me like I was made of window glass. I came 2,000 miles on a train that smelled like coal smoke and other people's misery. I have 40 cents in my pocket and nowhere to go if you drive away." She met his eyes. "But I'm not desperate. I'm practical. There's a difference." Samuel Mercer studied her for a long moment. The telegraph chattered inside the station, the water tower dripped, the horses stamped and blew, eager to be moving again. Then he reached out and took her carpet bag from her hand. "Wagons this way," he said. "If this story stirred something familiar in your heart, I'd be grateful to know where you're listening from today. Good stories, like good neighbors, are meant to be shared." The wagon jolted over a rut, and Evelyn gripped the seat edge to keep from sliding. The leather was cracked and sun-bleached, warm beneath her palms. Samuel hadn't spoken since they left town. 3 miles, maybe 4. The horse's hooves kicked up dust that settled on Evelyn's dress. She tasted grit between her teeth. She didn't ask questions. She watched the land instead, brown grass rippling under the wind. Fence posts leaning at tired angles. A hawk circling slow and patient against the white sky. "Margaret." She turned her head. Samuel's eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead. "That was her name. My wife." He worked his jaw like the words cost him something. "Fever took her in the night. 2 springs back." Evelyn nodded. "The children." He paused. "Ruth is 11. Caleb is 7. They don't—" Another pause. Longer this time. "They're not easy. You said that already." He glanced at her then, quick, measuring, and something in his face shifted, not quite softening, more like the slight loosening of a rope pulled too tight. They rode on. The ranch appeared over a low rise, a 2-story house with a wraparound porch, a barn listing slightly to the east, a windmill turning lazy circles against the sky. Evelyn heard its creak before she saw it, metal on metal, steady as a heartbeat. Somewhere a chicken clucked. A screen door banged in the wind. But it was the garden that caught her eye. Beside the porch, a patch of earth had gone wild. Thistle and crabgrass choked what might once have been rose. A rose bush sprawled sideways, half dead, strangled by morning glory vines. A wooden stake, with a faded ribbon, some kind of marker, jutted from the weeds at a broken angle. Someone had loved this garden once. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop. The horses blew and stamped. The front door opened. A girl stood in the frame. Thin. Brown hair pulled back so tight it stretched the skin at her temples. Arms crossed over her chest. She didn't step forward. Didn't wave. Didn't smile. Behind her, half hidden in shadow, a smaller face peered out. A boy, 7 years old. Evelyn remembered. He had his father's eyes and something else, something wary, something wounded. "Ruth," Samuel called. "Come say hello." The girl didn't move. "Pa said you'd be staying in the back room." Her voice carried flat across the yard, cold as well water. "Supper's cold biscuits. I didn't cook nothing else." Then she turned and walked back inside, and the boy vanished with her. And the door didn't slam, but it didn't stay open either. It just swung shut with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any slam could have. Evelyn looked at the closed door, at the wild garden, at the sunbonnet still hanging on a nail beside the window. Bleached almost white by 2 years of weather, no one had taken it down. 4 in the morning. Evelyn's eyes opened to darkness. No clock had woken her. No rooster yet. Just 30 years of rising before dawn, of lighting fires in other people's kitchens, of starting work while the world still slept. She lay still for a moment, listening. The house creaked and settled around her. Wind pushed against the window glass. Somewhere outside, a horse stamped in its stall. The room smelled of dust and something else, lavender. Faint and faded, coming from the pillow beneath her head. Margaret's pillow, Margaret's room. She dressed quickly in the dark, the same calico dress, wrinkled now from the journey, and felt her way down the narrow hall toward the kitchen. The floorboards groaned under her weight, announcing each step. The stove was cold. She knelt before it, found kindling in the box beside it, struck a match. The flame caught, small and orange, throwing shadows on the wall. She fed it slowly, carefully, the way she'd done 10,000 times before in 10 different kitchens that had never been her own. The room revealed itself in the growing light. Flour dusted the counter near the barrel someone had scooped carelessly and not wiped up. A cast-iron skillet sat on the stove. A skin of old grease congealed white across its surface. Dirty plates stacked in the wash basin, crusted with something that might have been beans 3 days ago. A coffee grinder bolted to the wall, grounds scattered beneath it like brown snow. Samuel had been managing alone. It showed in every corner. Evelyn found bacon wrapped in cheesecloth in the cold box. Eggs in a basket by the door, brown shells, some still warm from yesterday's laying. Cornmeal in a tin canister with a dented lid. She worked without hurrying, her hands remembering motions her mind didn't need to guide. Crack the eggs. 1, 2, 3. The yolks sat bright and yellow in the bowl. Slice the bacon thin, the knife needed sharpening. But it would do. Heat the grease until it shimmered and popped. The cornmeal went into a pot with water and salt, stirred slow to keep it from lumping. The smell filled the kitchen, bacon fat and wood smoke, and something almost sweet from the cornmeal as it thickened. The smell of morning, the smell of someone caring enough to cook. A floorboard creaked behind her. Evelyn didn't turn around. She kept stirring. Kept her back to the doorway, small feet on wood, a breath drawn in, then nothing. She lifted the bacon from the pan, laid it on a clean cloth to drain, poured the eggs into the hot grease. They sizzled and spat, edges going white and lacy. "That's Mama's pan." Ruth's voice came flat and hard from the doorway. Evelyn turned the eggs with a wooden spatula. "I know." She didn't cook eggs like that. She scrambled them soft. How soft? Silence. Evelyn glanced over her shoulder. Ruth stood rigid in her nightgown, bare feet on the cold floor, arms wrapped tight around herself. Behind her, Caleb's face appeared in the shadows, sleep-creased, wary, watching. "I asked you a question," Evelyn said. "How did your mama scramble them?" Ruth's jaw tightened. "You're not allowed to use her things. The pan's for cooking. Your mama cooked with it. Now I'm cooking with it. You're trying to replace her." Evelyn set the spatula down. She turned fully, wiping her hands on her apron, and looked at the girl. Really looked at the dark circles under her eyes, at the way her fingers dug into her own arms, at the tremor in her chin that she was fighting so hard to hide. "I can't replace your mama," Evelyn said. Her voice came out quieter than she'd intended. "Folks who pass on, they leave a space nobody else can fill. I know that better than most." She paused. "I'm only making breakfast." Ruth's eyes went bright and wet. Her lip curled. "I'm not eating it." And she grabbed Caleb's arm, yanked him backward. He stumbled, caught himself on the doorframe. For one moment his eyes met Evelyn's, wide, uncertain, hungry in more ways than one. Then Ruth pulled him down the hall, and a door slammed somewhere in the back of the house. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen. The eggs had gone crisp at the edges. She moved the pan off the heat, spooned the cornmeal mush into a bowl, laid the bacon on a plate, set it all on the table with 3 forks, 3 spoons, 3 cups of water from the pump that wasn't hers, at a table that wasn't hers, and waited. The clock on the wall ticked. The fire popped in the stove. Outside. The rooster finally crowed late, like everything else on this ranch. Footsteps in the hall. Light ones. Hesitant. Caleb appeared in the doorway again. Alone this time. His hair stuck up on one side. His nightshirt hung past his knees. Too big for him now, or maybe handed down from someone who'd outgrown it. He looked at the food on the table. Looked at Evelyn. "I'm hungry," he whispered. Evelyn pulled out the chair beside her. "Sit down." He glanced back toward the hallway, toward wherever Ruth had gone, and in that glance Evelyn saw it clear as day, the war inside him, loyalty pulling one way and need pulling another. A 7-year-old boy who'd been hungry for longer than just this morning. Then he crossed the kitchen on bare feet and climbed into the chair. But he didn't pick up his fork. He just sat there, staring at the plate, waiting for permission from someone who wasn't in the room. The second week, morning sun slanted across the porch as Evelyn found Samuel checking the harness on his horse. "I want to clear the garden," she said. He didn't look up. His hands kept working the leather straps, testing buckles, adjusting lengths. The horse stamped and flicked its tail at a fly. "The one by the porch," she added. "It's gone to weeds." Samuel's hand stopped. He stood there, back to her, shoulders rigid under his work shirt. A meadowlark called from the fence post. The windmill creaked its endless circle. Evelyn waited. He turned his head. Not all the way. Just enough that she could see the edge of his jaw. The tension in it. "That was Margaret's. I know." He was quiet for a long time. Then he finished with the harness, gathered the reins, and swung up into the saddle. The leather groaned under his weight. "Do what you want," he said. He rode out toward the north pasture without looking back. Evelyn found the tools in the barn, a hoe with an ash handle worn smooth by years of use, a rusted trowel, leather gloves too big for her hands. She carried them to the garden and stood at its edge, studying the tangle of growth. Thistle had taken over the left side, thick stalks bristling with purple flowers gone to seed. Crabgrass choked what might have been a vegetable bed. The rosebush sprawled sideways, half its canes dead and gray, the living one strangled by morning glory vines that had climbed and twisted and pulled it toward the earth. She put on the gloves, knelt in the dirt, started pulling weeds. The morning glory came up in long runners, roots clinging to the soil like fingers that didn't want to let go. She followed each vine back to its source, dug around the base with the trowel, yanked it free. Dirt sprayed across her dress. Sweat gathered at her temples and ran down the sides of her face, dripping off her chin. The earth smelled dark and rich when she turned it alive, despite 2 years of neglect. Earthworms curled pink in the broken soil. A beetle scurried away from her trowel. She pulled Thistle until her palms burned through the gloves, until her knees went numb from kneeling on stones, until her back ached with a familiar pain she'd known since girlhood. By noon, her throat was parched. By mid-afternoon, her arms trembled when she lifted the hoe. She kept working. The kitchen curtain moved. Evelyn didn't look up. She'd seen Ruth watching earlier, a pale face behind the glass. There and then gone like a ghost that couldn't decide whether to haunt or leave. The girl hadn't come outside. Hadn't said a word. Just watched. Let her watch. The third day. Evelyn found the tin box. It was buried beneath a collapsed tomato cage. Half hidden by dead leaves and matted grass, a small rectangular tin with a faded label she could barely read. She brushed off the dirt, pried open the lid with her thumbnail. Seeds. Dozens of small paper envelopes, each one labeled in careful handwriting. Tomato, brandywine, summer squash, marigold, French, pole beans, cucumber, pickling, Margaret's handwriting, Margaret's seeds, saved for a spring that never came. Evelyn closed the lid and set the tin aside on the porch step. She turned to the rose bush. Most of the canes were dead, brittle and gray, snapping like old bones when she tested them. But near the base, where the plant met the soil, she found green. Living wood beneath the bark, pale and moist when she scraped it with her nail. She dug around the roots carefully, loosening the packed earth with her fingers, pulling away the last of the morning glory that had tried to choke it dead. The roots came up white and damp. Alive. Still alive, after everything. Evelyn pressed the plant back into the soil, tamped the earth around it with both hands, poured the last of her water bucket over the base, and watched it soak in, darkening the dirt. The sun was going down when she heard footsteps on the porch. Samuel stood at the top of the steps, a full bucket in his hand. He looked at the garden, at the cleared beds, the piles of pulled weeds drying in the evening air, the rosebush standing upright again, and his face did something she couldn't quite read. Pain, maybe, or gratitude, or both tangled together so tight he couldn't separate them himself. He came down the steps and set the bucket beside her. "You've been out here 3 days straight." "The soil's good." Evelyn wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a smear of dirt. "Just needed someone to pay attention." Samuel lowered himself onto the porch steps. He sat with his elbows on his knees, hands hanging loose, eyes fixed on the garden. A mourning dove called from somewhere near the barn. The sky turned gold, then pink, then purple at the edges. Margaret used to say flowers were like prayers you could see. He shook his head slowly. I never did understand what she meant by that, but she sure loved this garden. Evelyn turned another shovelful of earth, broke up a clod with her fingers, feeling the cool dirt pack under her nails. She was right, Evelyn said. You understand it? No. She set down the trowel, looked at him directly. But I reckon I believe her. Samuel held her gaze. The last light caught his eyes, turned them almost golden for a moment. He opened his mouth like he might say something else. The screen door creaked open behind them. Ruth stood in the doorway. The tin box of seeds clutched against her chest. Her knuckles had gone white around it. These were Mama's, she said. Her voice shook. You had no right to touch them. The third Sunday. Evelyn stood in the small wooden church, hymnal open in her hands, and watched Ruth's lips. The girl wasn't singing. She was mouthing words, some of them. Anyway, her eyes darting between the page and the congregation around her, when the hymn reached a phrase with too many syllables. Ruth's mouth stopped moving altogether. She just stood there, staring at the page, face flushed red to the ears. Caleb didn't even pretend. He held his hymnal upside down. The church smelled of beeswax candles and old wood, and the lavender water Mrs. Hendricks in the front pew had dabbed behind her ears. Dust motes floated in the light from the tall windows. The congregation's voices rose and fell. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound! And Ruth's silence sat in the middle of it like a stone in a stream. On the wagon ride home, Evelyn sat in the back with the children while Samuel drove. The wheels rattled over ruts in the road. Dust rose and settled on their Sunday clothes. "The children don't go to school," Evelyn said. Samuel's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't turn around. "School's in Millbrook, 12 miles each way." Before a long pause, the horse's hooves clopped steady on the packed dirt. A crow called from a fence post and flapped away. "Margaret taught them," Samuel said. "She had schooling back east, 2 years at a ladies' academy." Another pause. "Then she got sick, and after that, he didn't finish. He didn't need to." Ruth's jaw tightened. She stared straight ahead at the back of her father's head. Arms crossed, saying nothing. But her hands had balled into fists in her lap. That evening, Evelyn found Samuel alone on the porch, staring out at the darkening fields. "I can teach them," she said. "Reading, writing, arithmetic. I taught myself mostly, but I taught myself well enough." Samuel looked at her for a long moment. The crickets had started up, a steady chirping from the grass. Somewhere in the barn, a horse nickered. "Ask them," he said. "See what they say." She found the children in the sitting room. Ruth sat in the corner with a piece of mending. She wasn't really working on the needle, hadn't moved in 5 minutes. Caleb lay on his stomach near the cold fireplace, drawing shapes in the ash with his finger. "I'd like to teach you both to read better," Evelyn said. "In the evenings? After supper?" Ruth's needle stopped moving entirely. "We don't need you to teach us anything." "All right." Evelyn crossed to the bookshelf, a small one. Just 3 shelves, mostly empty. She found what she was looking for, a worn copy of The Pilgrim's Progress. Spine cracked, pages yellowed and soft at the edges. Margaret's name was written inside the front cover in faded brown ink, the letters careful and precise. She sat down in the rocking chair by the window, lit the coal oil lamp on the side table, adjusting the wick until the flame burned steady behind the glass chimney. The light threw a warm circle across the braided rag rug at her feet. Then she opened the book and began to read aloud. "As I walked through the wilderness of this world, I lighted on a certain place where was a den, and I laid me down in that place to sleep." Her voice filled the quiet room. She didn't look at the children. She just read, steady and clear, the words falling into the silence like water into a dry well. Ruth's needle started moving again, fast. Angry stitches that would probably have to be pulled out tomorrow. Caleb's finger stopped tracing shapes in the ash. He turned his head slightly, just enough to hear better. Evelyn read for 20 minutes. Then she closed the book, turned down the lamp, and went to bed without saying good night. The second evening, she did the same thing. Sat in the rocking chair, lit the lamp, opened the book to where she'd left off. This time. When she looked up halfway through a page, Caleb was sitting in the doorway. Not inside the room, just at the threshold. Knees pulled up to his chest, chin resting on his arms, watching her with those creek water eyes. She kept reading. The third evening. Caleb moved closer. He sat on the braided rug near her feet, head tilted to one side, listening. Ruth stayed in her corner, but she'd put down the mending. Her hands lay still in her lap, and her eyes were fixed on some point in the middle distance. Evelyn turned a page. The lamp flame flickered in a draft from the window. And Christian passed through the valley of the shadow, where the mouth of the pit stood open beside the path, and foul fiends whispered temptations in his ear. Valley. Evelyn stopped, looked up. Ruth sat rigid in her chair, cheeks flushed pink in the lamplight. "You said it wrong," the girl said. "It's not valley, 2 sounds. It's veli, 1 sound. Quick, that's how Mama read it." Evelyn held the girl's gaze. Ruth's chin lifted, defiant, braced for the rebuke. "Thank you," Evelyn said. "I appreciate the correction." Ruth blinked, her mouth opened, closed. "Would you like to read the next part?" Evelyn held out the book. "Since you know the words better than I do." Silence. Caleb turned his head, looking at his sister. The lamp flame steadied. The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside, the crickets sang their endless song. Ruth stood up, crossed the room, stopped beside the rocking chair, not close, but closer than she'd ever stood before. "Give it here," she said. Evelyn handed her the book. Ruth's hands trembled slightly as she took it. She found the place on the page, traced the line with her finger, and began to read. Her voice came out thin and uncertain at first, stumbling over the longer words, but she kept going, word by word, line by line. Caleb crawled forward until he sat at his sister's feet, looking up at her face in the lamplight, and Ruth read. When she finished the page, she closed the book and handed it back without meeting Evelyn's eyes. Then she walked to the doorway and stopped, her back to the room. "Same time tomorrow," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Then she was gone down the dark hallway. And Caleb looked up at Evelyn with something new in his face, something that might have been the beginning of trust, but from somewhere in the back of the house came a different sound, a door closing softly, and then the muffled, shuddering intake of breath that meant Ruth was crying where she thought no one could hear. End of the 4th week. Supper had been quieter than usual, just the scrape of forks on plates, the clink of water glasses, the tick of the clock on the wall. Ruth picked at her food, pushing beans from one side of her plate to the other, not eating. When Evelyn rose to clear the dishes, the girl's chair was already empty. Samuel looked at the vacant seat. She does that sometimes, goes off by herself. "Where?" He shrugged, rubbed his face with both hands, the rough sound of calluses against stubble. "Barn, usually, or down by the creek." An hour passed. The sun dropped below the tree line, painting the sky orange and purple. The air cooled. Fireflies began their slow, blinking dance across the yard. Evelyn stood at the kitchen window, drying the same plate she'd dried 3 times already. Through the glass, she could see the barn dark now, no lantern light, the big doors standing half open like a mouth that couldn't decide whether to speak. Samuel came up beside her. "I'll go look. Let me—" He started to protest, then stopped, looked at her for a long moment, something moving behind his eyes, nodded once. Evelyn crossed the yard in the failing light. The grass was damp with evening dew, soaking through her shoes, cold against her ankles. The barn smelled of hay and horse sweat and old leather warm. Living smells mixed with dust and the sharp sweetness of manure. She stood in the doorway, letting her eyes adjust to the deeper darkness inside. Ruth. No answer, just the shuffle of horses in their stalls, the creak of old wood settling. She moved deeper into the barn. Past the horses, the sorrel mare turned her head. Ears pricked forward past the workbench, cluttered with tools and bent nails and a coffee can full of screws. Past the milk pail hanging on its nail. A ladder led up to the hayloft. Rough-hewn rungs worn smooth in the middle by years of climbing hands. She put her hand on the first rung. A sound from above. Soft. Muffled. The kind of sound someone makes when they're trying not to make any sound at all. Evelyn climbed. The hayloft was dark except for the last gray light coming through the gaps in the wall boards, thin stripes of fading day falling across the hay bales. The air was thick and warm, sweet with dried grass and dust that tickled her nose. Ruth sat in the far corner, knees drawn up, face buried in something she clutched against her chest. Her shoulders shook. Evelyn stopped at the top of the ladder, waited. Ruth's head came up, even in the dim light. Evelyn could see the wet streaks on her cheeks, the red rims around her eyes, the way her nose had gone blotchy from crying. The girl was wrapped in a wool shawl, hand-knotted fringe, faded blue pattern with small yellow flowers woven through it. Margaret's shawl. Had to be. "Go away," Ruth said. Her voice came out thick and ragged, torn at the edges. Evelyn didn't go away. She climbed the rest of the way into the loft and sat down on a hay bale. 6 feet from the girl. Not close, but not leaving either. "I said go away. I heard you." Ruth's face contorted anger and grief and something else, something desperate, all fighting for control. "You don't belong here. You cook in her kitchen. You sit in her chair. You dig in her garden." Her voice rose, cracking like thin ice. "You're making him forget her." The words hung in the dusty air. An owl called from somewhere outside, one long, mournful note. Evelyn said nothing for a moment. Then, "Your pa hasn't forgotten her. He smiles now." Ruth's voice broke on the word. "He talks at supper. She pressed the shawl against her face and made a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob, something in between. Something that had been building for 2 years. "She's only been gone 2 years, and already everything's changing, and it's because of you. I know. You don't know anything." Evelyn looked at her hands, at the calluses and the scars and the dirt still under her nails from the garden. She'd carried her own grief in these hands for more than 20 years now. "I was 12 when my mama died," she said quietly. "Fever. Same as yours." I sat beside her bed for 3 days, holding her hand, watching her slip away. She passed on a Tuesday morning while I was sleeping in the chair beside her. Ruth's crying hitched. She didn't look up, but she'd gone still. My papa lasted 3 more years after that. He just stopped trying, stopped eating right, stopped coming in from the fields when the rain came, caught the pneumonia the winter I turned 15. Evelyn paused. "My aunt took me in after, raised me until I was 20. Then her heart gave out while she was hanging laundry. Just fell down in the yard with a wet sheet still in her hands." She lifted her eyes to meet Ruth's. "I've never forgotten any of them, not for one single day." Ruth's chin trembled. "Then how do you stand it?" "Some days I can't. Some days it sits right here." Evelyn touched her chest. "Heavy as a millstone, and I can barely draw breath." She let her hand fall. But I get up anyway. I make breakfast anyway. I keep putting one foot in front of the other, because that's what they would have wanted me to do. Ruth shook her head, tears running fresh down her cheeks. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm scared if I stop being angry. If I let things change, I'll lose her. I'll forget what she looked like, what she smelled like. Her voice broke into pieces. I can't remember what her voice sounded like anymore. I try, and I can't hear it. Evelyn moved then, crossed the space between them, knelt in the straw beside the girl, close but not touching. You won't lose her, she said. She's your mama. She'll always be your mama. Nothing changes that, not me, not time, not anything. Well, how do you know? Because I still remember the way my mama's hands felt when she braided my hair, the way she hummed while she cooked, the way she smelled like bread and soap and something else that was just her. Evelyn's voice stayed steady, but barely. 22 years gone. And I remember. Ruth stared at her. Does it ever stop hurting? No. Ruth's face crumpled. But you get used to carrying it, Evelyn said. Like an old suitcase you've carried so long you don't notice the weight anymore. The owl called again, closer now. The stars were coming out through the gaps in the roof boards. First one, then 3, then a dozen, then more than she could count. Ruth reached out. Her fingers found Evelyn's sleeve, gripped it. They sat like that, not speaking, while the sky turned fully dark and the moon rose white and round above the barn. The horses settled below. A cat. Evelyn hadn't known there was a cat padded across the loft floor and disappeared into the shadows. Ruth stood, still clutching the shawl around her shoulders. She walked to the ladder and paused with one foot on the top rung. Will you braid my hair tomorrow? She asked. Her voice was small. The way Mama used to. Evelyn nodded. Ruth climbed down into the darkness. Evelyn stayed a moment longer, looking at the stars through the broken boards, feeling something shift in her chest, an old lock turning, a door long rusted beginning to open. Then Samuel's voice cut through the night, calling from the house, and there was something in it she hadn't heard before, an edge of urgency that made her move toward the ladder without thinking. 6 weeks. The garden had come alive. Evelyn stood at the edge of it in the early morning light, watching the tomato seedlings push through the dark soil, small green fists uncurling toward the sun. The marigolds Margaret had saved were coming up too, a row of fuzzy gray-green leaves along the border. Even the rose bush had put out new growth, 3 pale buds swelling at the tips of the surviving canes, tight as fists but softening day by day. The screen door banged open behind her. Evelyn, look! Caleb ran across the porch, bare feet slapping the boards. A piece of paper clutched in his hand. He skidded to a stop beside her, breathing hard, and thrust the paper toward her face. I drawed our family, he said. See? 4 stick figures stood in a row on the page, drawn in charcoal from the fireplace, a tall one with a beard that would be Samuel, a medium one with a triangle dress, 2 smaller ones, holding hands. Evelyn's throat tightened. Who's this? She asked, pointing to the figure in the dress. That's you. Caleb looked up at her. Matter of fact. And that's Pa, and that's Ruth, and that's me. I made your hair brown like it really is. He'd drawn her with a smile, a big, crooked smile that took up half her charcoal face. It's beautiful, she said. Her voice came out strange, thick around the edges. Caleb beamed and ran back inside. the screen door in pocket. That afternoon, Ruth appeared in the kitchen doorway while Evelyn kneaded bread dough, her hands white with flour. "Could you—" The girl stopped, twisted her fingers together, tried again. "Would you braid my hair like we talked about?" They sat on the edge of Ruth's bed. Evelyn worked the brush through the girl's tangled hair. She still wasn't caring for it properly. But she was trying now. The knots came out easier than they had that first time. "Mama did 3 strands, Ruth said quietly, starting high, and she hummed." Evelyn began to braid, her fingers finding the old rhythm. She hummed Amazing Grace, the only hymn she knew all the way through, and felt Ruth's shoulders slowly relax under her hands. When she finished, Ruth touched the braid, ran her fingers down its length. "It's not exactly the same," she said, "but it's good." Evening came soft and golden. The children went to bed early, Caleb worn out from chasing chickens, Ruth quiet but calm after their time together. The house settled into stillness. Evelyn found Samuel on the porch, 2 cups of coffee on the rail beside him. He handed her one without a word. The tin cup was warm in her hands, steam rising in the cooling air. She sat down beside him on the porch swing, the one he'd told her Margaret had asked him to build, years ago. The chains creaked as they swayed gently. Crickets sang from the tall grass. A whippoorwill called from somewhere near the creek. "Garden's coming along," Samuel said. "It is. Margaret would have—" He stopped, worked his jaw, started again. "She would have liked you. I think, the way you just do what needs doing. Don't ask for thanks." Evelyn sipped her coffee. It was bitter and strong, the way he always made it. "I'm not her," she said. "I know." He turned his head, looked at her directly. His eyes caught the last of the sunset light, gold and orange reflected in that creek water gray. "But you're something I didn't expect." The swing creaked. The crickets sang. Inside the house, a floorboard settled. Samuel started. He stopped. The wind shifted. A gust from the west, warm and dry, carrying a smell Evelyn didn't recognize, dusty. Mineral. Electric. Wrong. Samuel's whole body went rigid. He stood up so fast the swing jerked backward on its chains. His coffee cup hit the porch boards, spilling brown liquid across the wood. He was staring west, where the sunset had turned the horizon a strange color, not orange anymore. Copper. Dark copper. Spreading upward like a bruise. The horses screamed in the barn. "Samuel, what—" He grabbed her arm. His fingers dug in hard enough to hurt. "Get the children," he said. His voice had changed flat. Urgent, no room for questions. "Get them to the root cellar, now. What is it?" The chickens burst from behind the barn, running in wild circles, squawking. A tumbleweed bounced across the yard, then another, then a dozen, rolling out of nowhere like the land itself was running away. Samuel's face had gone pale under the weathered brown. "Dust storm," he said. "Big one, coming fast." He released her arm and ran for the barn, shouting for the horses. "You have maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. Get the children underground and don't come out until I come for you." Evelyn stood frozen for 1 heartbeat. 2. The copper sky swallowed the last of the light. The wind rose, warm and gritty, carrying the first fine dust that stung her eyes and coated her lips. Then she turned and ran for the house. The cellar door was heavy old oak, swollen with moisture, hinges rusted and stiff. Evelyn yanked it open with both hands, muscles straining. "Down," she said. "Now!" Caleb scrambled down the wooden steps, half falling in the dark. Ruth hesitated at the top, looking back toward the barn where Samuel had disappeared into the swirling dust. "I should help Pa." Evelyn grabbed the girl's arm. "Your pa needs you safe. Down." Ruth went. Evelyn followed, pulling the door shut above her head. The latch caught with a dull thunk. Darkness swallowed them whole. She fumbled along the earthen wall, fingers scraping across cool dirt and rough wood, until she found the shelf. Candle, matches. Her hands shook as she struck the match once. Twice the head scraped and flared. She touched the flame to the wick. Dim orange light pushed back the black. The root cellar was small, 8 feet by 10. Walls of packed dirt that smelled of damp earth and old potatoes. Shelves lined with mason jars of preserved vegetables, green beans, tomatoes, pickled cucumbers. A few burlap sacks lay heaped in one corner. The air was cool and close, thick with the smell of root vegetables and mineral soil. Above them, the storm hit. The sound came first, a roar like nothing Evelyn had ever heard. Not wind, not thunder. Something alive, something hungry. The cellar door shuddered in its frame. Dirt sifted down from the ceiling, fine as flour, coating their hair, their shoulders. Caleb pressed against Evelyn's side. His whole body trembled like a newborn calf. His fingers dug into her arm hard enough to leave bruises. "Where's Pa?" His voice came out thin and high. "Where's Pa? He's keeping the animals safe." Evelyn pulled him closer. "He'll come when it's over." "How do you know?" "Because your Pa keeps his word." The roar grew louder. The jars rattled on their shelves, one tipped, rolled, shattered on the floor. Pickle brine spread across the packed earth, sharp and vinegar sour. Ruth flinched at the sound but didn't cry out. "It's going to take the house," she whispered. "It's going to take everything. The house will stand. You don't know that." Evelyn looked at the girl. Ruth's face was pale in the candlelight. Eyes too wide, hands clenched into fists at her sides. 11 years old, already motherless, now sitting in a hole in the ground while the world tore itself apart above her head. "No," Evelyn said. "I don't know for certain, but I believe it will." The candle flame guttered, nearly went out, steadied again. Dust came through the cracks around the door, a fine gray powder that coated their lips, gritted between their teeth. Evelyn pulled both children closer, one on each side, their small bodies pressed against her ribs. "Tell us something." Ruth's voice came sudden, urgent. "Tell us a story. Please." She paused. "Mrs. Evelyn?" Mrs. Evelyn. Still not Mama, but something. Something new. Evelyn closed her eyes. The storm screamed. The earth shook. "I came here on a train," she began. 2,000 miles from St. Louis. I sat in a car that smelled of coal smoke and sweat and fear. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know who would be waiting. Caleb's trembling slowed. Ruth's breathing steadied. There were 5 of us. 5 women. All strangers. All hoping for something better. When the train stopped at Clearwater, the other women got chosen one by one. I stood on that platform and watched them leave. "What did you do?" Ruth whispered. "I waited. Weren't you scared?" "Yes." The storm howled. Something crashed above, wood splintering, metal shrieking. Caleb whimpered. Ruth reached across and gripped Evelyn's hand. "But you stayed," Ruth said. "I stayed." Evelyn squeezed the girl's fingers. "And now I'm not alone anymore. None of us are." They huddled together, the three of them tangled on the dirt floor, the storm raging above, the candle burning down to a stub in its tin holder, and Evelyn prayed. Not out loud, just in her heart, the way her mama had taught her. The roaring began to fade, slowly, gradually. The shaking stopped. The dust settled. The silence that followed was so complete, it rang in her ears. Then footsteps, heavy, uneven, coming down the cellar stairs. The door creaked open. Samuel stood in the frame, covered head to toe in gray dust, a gash on his forehead, leaking blood down the side of his face. His eyes found them in the candlelight, found Evelyn with his children in her arms, and something in his expression crumpled. "Is everyone—" His voice cracked. "Is everyone all right?" Ruth pulled back from Evelyn, looked up at her father, then back at the woman who had held her through the storm. "We're all right, Pa," she said quietly. "Mrs. Evelyn kept us safe." Dawn came slow and gray through the dust-filmed windows. Evelyn stood on the porch, a cup of cold coffee in her hands, and looked at what the storm had left behind. Dust covered everything in the yard. The barn roof, the fence posts, the glass. A fine gray powder that turned the world colorless. Muffled. Strange. One section of fence had gone down. A shutter hung crooked from a single hinge. The windmill had stopped turning, its blades clogged with grit. But the barn still stood. The house still stood. And the garden. Evelyn set down her coffee and walked across the yard. Her shoes left prints in the dust. She knelt at the edge of the garden bed, brushing gray powder from the leaves of the tomato seedlings she'd staked. So carefully. Green. Still green. Bent, but not broken. The marigolds had survived too dusty but upright, and the rose bush stood where she'd braced it, its pale buds coated with grit but intact, still reaching for light that would come when the sky cleared. Footsteps behind her. Samuel's boots appeared at the edge of her vision. "You saved more than you know," he said quietly. Sunday came bright and clean, the sky washed blue by the storm's passing. After church, Samuel hitched the horses and turned them north instead of toward home. "Where are we going?" Ruth asked. "Miller's Creek." Samuel said, "Haven't been there in a while. Figured it was time." They spread Margaret's quilt beneath the old oak tree, the patchwork one, with squares of faded calico and gingham, stitched by hands that had been still for 2 years now. The fabric was soft under Evelyn's palms, worn thin in places, holding the warmth of the sun. The creek ran shallow and clear over smooth stones, catching light, making small music. The air smelled of wet grass and mud and the wild mint that grew along the banks. A meadowlark sang from somewhere in the tall grass. Caleb lasted 3 minutes on the blanket before he was knee-deep in the water, trousers rolled up, chasing something in the shallows. "Got one?" He held up his cupped hands, water streaming through his fingers. I got a frog. Let it go. Ruth scrambled to her feet. It's going to... The frog jumped. Caleb shrieked. Ruth laughed a real laugh, bright and startled, surprised right out of her. Evelyn watched them, the boy with his wet clothes, the girl with her careful braid coming loose, both of them alive and whole and laughing in the afternoon sun. The sound of it settled into her chest and stayed there. Samuel sat down beside her on the quilt, close, his shoulder almost touching hers. I'm not good with words, he said. Never have been. I know. But I want you to understand something. He turned to face her, reached out and took her hands in his, her rough, work-scarred hands with their calluses and broken nails. He held them like they mattered. What you did for this place, for those children, for me. Evelyn's eyes burned. She didn't blink. I came to that station looking for help, Samuel said. His voice was low, rough at the edges. I found something else, something I didn't know I needed. Samuel, let me finish. He tightened his grip on her hands. You brought this house back to life. You held my children through the storm. You planted seeds in ground I'd given up on. He paused. I reckon what I'm trying to say is, I'd like you to stay. Not as help, as family. Behind them. Ruth chased Caleb through the shallows, their laughter rising up through the branches of the oak tree and scattering into the endless blue sky. Evelyn looked at this man with the dust still in his beard and the healing cut on his forehead, at his children splashing in the creek, at the old tree with initials carved into its trunk by hands long gone to dust themselves. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She nodded. Samuel's weathered face softened. He nodded back, and the meadowlark sang on. There's a quiet that comes after a story like this one. Something tender sitting in the chest. Not quite sadness. Not quite joy. Just a fullness that doesn't need a name. Many of us have known what it feels like to stand somewhere and wait to be passed over. Looked through. Counted out before we even had a chance. Some of us have carried grief so long it became part of how we walk, how we breathe, how we love, and perhaps you've known what it is to find belonging in the last place you expected, with people who arrived late and dusty and imperfect, but who stayed. It's all right if this story stirred something you thought you'd put away. It's all right if you remembered hands you haven't held in years, or a garden you once tended, or a voice you can no longer quite hear. These things don't ask to be understood. They only ask to be carried. Gently, the way we've always carried them. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.